Morning, my name's Alf Evans and I'll be talking to you about what we've been doing in 2015 so far. Rightio, hello again. We're recording in the back of the warehouse again, so we've got development clunking around upstairs and we've probably got warehouse stuff going on, so we apologise for that in advance. We were quite busy in January because of, Malawi, as you can see in that photograph there, and Malaysia as well. But before we go into 2015, if you listen to the update on what we did in 2014, I made mention that we had some figures to verify. And the good news is that all of the Colombia figures verified with the figures that we were holding. So we've added them to the total, and we've come to the totals of 2014, which we've got one deployment left to add to it, and we'll talk about that at the end. So that's the number of boxes, tents, MIDI tents, UN tents, shelter kits, tarpaulins, and that is, and I don't count tarps in that figure, 12,738. That's boxes and tents and what have you. But if you add to it the tarpaulins that we were talking about, then I will just undo my calculator here because I've done it for you. With 2 tarpaulins per household, it's 14,466 by my figures. Those still are not the tie a bow on it. That was 2014. Because we've got the Haiti figures, and if you're thinking, hang on, that was 5 years ago, it was. We still have tents and boxes with the International Office of Migration, IOM. All of the camp management was handed over to them, and they now have gone through several phases of the Haiti deployment. First, it was initial disaster, which we were involved with people on the ground. Then it was getting people home, offering them shelter boxes as an inducement to get them out of the camps and to make a go of starting themselves back into the communities. We've then moved into a phase where IOM have moved on to getting rental agreements, helping them with rent, helping them purchase houses, helping them be absorbed into other communities, which is very slow as projects have come on and communities have rebuilt, and people are still in camps 5 years after, and their tents will only last a year to 18 months. So we've got a store of kit for any Caribbean emergencies, but the IOM are also managing that by replacing old tents, ours and others, to keep people in the camps as the slow absorption into the rental agreements and all of the other systems they've got in place. I think it's 7 projects they've got going to absorb those people, and our tents are being used to keep them in the game, keep them in the camps in a tent that keeps the elements out and keeps some privacy in, while those systems are still going 5 years after the fact. But these are these things that we come across that have a footprint and cast a shadow, 10, 15 years into the future. Haiyan is another one of those things that cast a huge footprint over the people that it affected, who will still be dealing with that disaster 10, 15 years down the line. So it's a long time to us, 5 years, but from a huge disaster where, the Haiti earthquake leveled the place, there will still be people in 10 years who are still dealing with that tragedy. Anyway, moving on to 2015. At the beginning of the new year, we had Madagascar. We had a storm that rolled into Madagascar. Madagascar's very poor, lots of people on the margins, vulnerable people, and it caused lots of widespread damage down in the south. Up north is in Tana. The capital city is generally well served by the agencies that have permanent offices there, and our bread and butter is further down south in the periphery areas where no one really gets to. We have an ongoing deal with the Madagascar Disaster Management Authority, and we have kit stored with them. And we have an agreement with them, and the agreement is that they don't deploy kit, but they started to deploy kit, which we weren't too impressed with. So we sent a team to catch up with that, and they went around ensuring that as many people could get those tents did, and also to train the people who put up the tents that needed some help, because the BNGRC weren't the experts in putting the tents up. So we're reviewing storing boxes with the Madagascar Disaster Management Authority. The bonuses are that the kit is there. It's already beyond customs. There's a faster, rapid response. But the downside is that they might want to deploy the kit before the teams are there, and they might not be up to the standard of putting the tents up that our volunteers would have overseeing that. So we've got that moral dilemma, and we'll be ongoing looking at Madagascar and seeing how we can increase our links with them and increase the training to make sure we get a better response next time. Gaza, that's been happening for quite some time now. The success story is that we got 250 boxes deployed with ACTED. Too dangerous to have our people there. The border could close at any time. There could be an airstrike trapping our people the wrong side of the border. So fortunately we've got some kit to people who wouldn't have got it, but unfortunately we've had to work through partners. This comes up time and time again. I'd rather not work through partners. I'd rather have our SRTs on the ground, our volunteers there to ensure everything is done, but that is not as good as to having, not being able to do anything is not an approach that we want to go down. If we can get there, and people like ACTED, who we've made proper partnerships with, and get proper verification through their workers and their volunteers, and through photography, video and reports, we will still do it. It's not my preferred option. As I say, we would rather have our volunteers ensuring everything is fine. We've got 250 boxes out with ACTED in Gaza. A second 250 will arrive in the next few days, and then we're also in talks with ACTED to see about what we can do after that and whether the whole deployment has been successful. Malaysia. Malaysia was the big thing that happened pretty much last year. It started. A team arrived just before the year turned over, and we already had equipment stored in Kuala Lumpur, in Sabang actually, and so we had quite a response very quickly to this one. We had our ShelterBox associate, Mr. Ong. He was out there providing information, providing us with contacts. The team were in the Prime Minister's office the day after they arrived, due to him being a connected guy, ShelterBox and Rotary working together there. And the Prime Minister, afforded every help that he possibly could for us, so we were, quick out of the blocks there. This picture you're looking at now I think is unusual in the fact that most people lose a house during the disasters that we respond to. This family actually gained a house. The neighbour's house lifted up with the floodwaters and was deposited on top of their house. And moving on to the main picture, that family in the top left-hand corner there, that is the actual family that have pitched their tent in that enclave, and they and their neighbours are going to dismantle that house and rebuild it, and also repair the damage to their house. They were scared that if they went in the house, that the other house would actually fall in and crush them. So they were very, very grateful of that tent, and it's exactly in our sweet spot where that tent has kept their claim to the land. They can repair their house during the the time that shelter and that dignity and that protection that the box that you have sent will afford them. That is the sweet spot. When we were talking about the partnerships and how we can help people, but that's not where we want to be. Where we want to be is Malaysia. We've got an associate, he's connected, we've got the government on side, no one else was responding. We managed to respond quickly with pre-positioned equipment to help people that people were not going to be helped otherwise. So from the very pinnacle of what we do, that's what we try to do, but we will still work, even though it's not as efficient of that, to reach people that would no longer be reached by anyone else. So looking at the numbers, tarpaulins going out to a household where appropriate. Just under 1,000 families helped there. Of note is that our tent that we've got not a prototype. We had a prototype, and that's the first production model, the Mark 1, of a tent made by another company. It looks very similar to the tent in the top left. It's got a slightly bigger porch, a slightly different window configuration, which was reported to be cooler, and our monitoring and evaluation teams will be following up on that. And it's got slightly more cross points, which makes the tent stronger. The big advantage is that what you can't see is inside the liner is already attached. So it goes up much quicker than our other tent, and we'll be looking at ways of taking that forward and possibly having that as our main tent, or certainly an alternative depending on price, cost of getting it to us, and developing better versions of it. And also, the one that we need to answer the question on is how long does that last? We know our tent lasts 8 months to a year in the sun, worst conditions. We don't know quite how long the OA's tent is going to last in practicality. I mean, we think it's going to last because it's made of very similar material and has been tested before we get our hands on it. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So we will be coming back with that to see whether we will be adopting that as another dome tent that we use. So that concludes what we were doing in the first few months. And now we're moving on to what we're doing this week. What is ongoing? We're looking at that key. We have got teams in Malawi and Turkey at present. Malawi will cover in greater detail, but that is flooding in Malawi. I was going to start pointing to that, but of course you can't see that at the moment, is that there's a swage of flooding that covered Madagascar through Africa, Zimbabwe, they've got flooding as well. And it's no coincidence that there is also flooding in Peru and Colombia and parts of South America at the moment that we're looking at. So our active team is Malawi at the moment, and we've got 1,000 boxes there and 650 shelter kits and 500 tarpaulins. Another big effort for people that no other agency, although they are working there, we're working in areas where other agencies have not reached because there's so many homeless people driven out by the flooding that's been going on weeks now, and we've been there quite a few weeks. We've got a team in Turkey, several reasons. One, there's a tent factory that makes UN spec tents in Turkey, which if it's up to standard, we want to check that tent factory out and see if we can add that into our logistics sort of chain to getting tents into Turkey and into Syria as well from the Turkish border. That will reduce our costs there. If that tent is up to spec in the factory, our people we can do business with will hand it over to our purchasers and they will do independent checks on them. What they're also doing is they're working with an agency called GEA, which are Urban Search and Rescue, a Turkish outfit, very, very professional, very, very well respected. And we worked with them back in the earthquake in Turkey a few years ago. And also one of our corporate donors also give money to them and were interested in getting us to work together because they believe in both organisations and think we could be stronger by working in partnership in Turkey the next time round. Well, we've already done it and we agree we'll try and work in the future. So our team are over there doing train the trainer with our equipment and seeing where else we can work and how we can benefit from their Turkish registration, see if we can use them as a tax-free consignee, see if we can use them for assessments, see if we can partner up on their deployments. So we've got our eyes and ears and also people operating on the ground that we can send our volunteers to hook up with just to speed up the process. Because everything we do, the sun rises and sets with, can we reach more families ethically quicker? And that's pretty much the engine that drives everything that we do. Places that we're looking at as well, there's a spread across the map there, and if we've not covered it by the end, we'll come back to that slide and tick off the ones I've missed. So Malaysia, I've mentioned it a few times. Malaysia's over now, and we covered that just under 1,000 households helped with tents, shelter boxes and midi tents, and that new tent that we've got came out of boxes as well. So we will hopefully get a monitoring and evaluation team in there. We've used the OAS tents in Nepal last year, so we're looking at sending a monitoring and evaluation team to do quite a few other things in Nepal, but one of the questions that Ops will be asking is how is that OAS tent wearing up? Does it do as it's promised? So in Malaysia, very widespread flooding, very difficult logistically to get things. I think there's some videos on the YouTube channel about some of the distributions that happened in Malaysia, that they were trekking up into the jungles, almost distributing individual boxes to reach those families that weren't going to be aided by anyone else. Malawi, we brushed on that as well. If you look at the numbers there, 106,000 estimates. Some of the estimates put it as 250,000 people have been displaced. We've got a 15-person team at the moment. The 10 in brackets there that's our core team. You've caught us on a changeover sort of period where we're changing over the in-country coord. That's a system where we have a staff member, or at least one staff member, coordinating the logistics, the glad handing, the politics, the smooth supply of boxes as well, not just logistics into the country, but logistics within the country as well, making sure that all the drivers are paid, that they're doing their job properly, that we're hooking in with the cluster, the shelter cluster, so we're not treading on anyone's toes or coordinating with their efforts properly. And also ensuring that all the SRTs, all their efforts, all their teams are coordinated and linked up, and whether we've got the right people in the right place, whether the assessments are doing what they should. It's quite a complicated job to allow the volunteers, when they arrive, to get on with what they volunteered to do, what they're trained to do, which is go out, assess and deliver tents and boxes. So we've got a bit of a bulge of people travelling through Malawi at the moment, and that'll reduce down to 10 as our core, and then in about a week's time it'll bulge up again as the handovers are being done. We've got 1,000 shelter boxes, 650 shelter kits, and we're looking at just over 250 distributed so far. We're starting to get down to about 50 shelter boxes distributed in a day, on a good day, but it is, oddly enough, in a flood, it's absolutely bucketing it down out there, and that's turning the roads to mud. It's making everything that they do very, very difficult. Another interesting development on the Malawi deployment is that we have with the International Federation of Red Cross. They are running the cluster, the shelter cluster, and our operations coordinator Dave Ray is actually, we've deployed him to work in the cluster. So he is not working with the direct efforts of the shelter box deployment, but he's very much part of the effort because he's helping run the cluster, which one gets us recognised as the cluster as something we recognise, and we want to be closer links with it. We want to start running those clusters, gaining expertise and offering expertise as well. You know, taking what they do well and bringing it into our operations, and hopefully there'll be something that we do better than they do, and trying to offer that and trying to link in with the way they do things to make the whole system work better. And for us to link in where we link in, but also to leave us to do what we do individually, so we don't tread on other people's toes, and we integrate our model as well as possible, but don't lose the bits where we're doing things slightly differently. An example of that is the amount of aid that we target our families with. You can see in that picture there that, you know, there's two people carrying a shelter box that will go to one family. Well, you know, that's $1,000 of donors' money. The other aid agencies would rather, they tend to, and it's not a fixed rule, but they tend to go for a smaller amount distributed more widely. Our model, for reasons which I won't bore you at the moment, if you have any questions incidentally, please email me at alfe@shelterbox.org, and I can bring it up in the next recording. And if you want to do any specific topics for interest, or whether you're using this to bulk out your speaking engagements or just keep you updated, then let me know. I can do specialist, I can get volunteers in, or we can get experts in to give you the answers that you want. Where did I digress? We're talking about money spent per family. Yes, we spend a lot more per family. That's our ethos. That's where we're slightly different from the other aid agencies, but I'm more than comfortable to keep doing it that way. Now, that's just a picture, but that is one of my favourite pictures of the year already, possibly in the last 18 months. That, there's people scurrying along, almost running there. That box is 54 kilos, so you can tell how happy they are, not just by the smiles, but the way that they're running along. This is, for them, it's like winning the lottery. I've gone through this calculation before, but if it's $1 a day that they're on, which is not unusual in parts of Africa, they've got 3 years worth of wages of equipment in that box. So that's, if you're English, apparently, or in the UK, the wage is supposed to be 25,000. So that's 75,000 pounds worth of equipment in that box in our Western terms. And that's if you can buy it. If it's flooding and there are no aid getting through, then that box has a monetary term the way we donate. It's got a monetary term in wages from their point of view, but the value is actually priceless, because you can't buy that equipment. It's not there. That's why we're having to deploy it for free. And also you can see down there that box number, the family that have that donated that, or the individual, the institution, will know where that box has gone. Moving on to more remote stuff, Gaza, we've already covered that in the earlier slide. Syria, we've got ongoing distributions, both in Iraq and Syria itself. We've got hand in hand for Syria doing ongoing distributions inside Syria. And we've got 500 UN spec tents en route. That's the kind of square circusy type tents that look like circus tents to me. The reason we use the UN tent inside of Syria is that we don't want to draw attention to us being on one side or the other. We don't want to draw attention to the people delivering aid that are delivering aid to one side or the other. Conflict zones offer all sorts of traps and risks that just aren't apparent in our normal deployments. That's why we've made a conscious decision to not send anyone from ShelterBox into Syria itself. Right back in the early days, 2-3 years ago when Syria first kicked off, we got the offer to actually work with one of the armed factions, and we chose not to. We're not taking sides, we're just helping people displaced. So using the UN tent makes the security risks that Hand in Hand and other people were working with much less, as in they can't be targeted as working with one group or the other, and the tents that we supply look like everybody else's. So again, it helps us blend in. But that picture there, that's from Gaza, that's one of our tents. It's not actual troops on the ground conflict type stuff, so our tent is lightweight and the best for that, so that's why they've gone there. So we only use the non-branded or the UN spec tents as a necessary evil if there's some security situation or whether it's an environment thing that we have to use. So we will adapt what we do to not be a product-based thing where we give you this box, we give you this tent, we give you shelter, and we try to be the most appropriate shelter, knowing full well that we would like to give the box as if that's the best thing, and hopefully with the monitoring evaluation, it is the best thing for most of what we do. So more remote, Niger, an ongoing response with Plan Niger. And I've just had notification this morning that I haven't even altered the slide. We had 200 boxes that went out just before Christmas. We've delivered another 368 to Plan International, and we've just had a report back that those have been distributed. Now I will go through the report and I'll go through the verification before those are notified to donors. Well, we want to really go in, drill down to as much as we possibly can with our partners about the verification thing. Again, I don't want to do partnerships and remote distributions, but Niger is a dangerous country. We sent a team to go and oversee the distribution, and when they were conferring with the security people in Niger, they discovered that it was too dangerous to go out. And we've all seen in the news that if you push the risks of people delivering aid in these type countries, there is a point of which you go beyond where there are serious consequences, which touch wood, and I am, we don't want to go down that. So we made the decision to do Train the Trainer in the capital city where the security situation is much less risky, and we trained Plan in how we wanted to see the things deployed, and they're working well with us at the moment. We have got another 448 waiting to go in once we've cleared that verification, and they will go in. Places like Niger, very poor countries, the response is a lot slower. Things happen slower. I'd like to think that we're the thing that provides the gap between nothing and the next thing. And that next thing generally happens a lot slower in places like Somalia, Niger, North Korea, places like that where there's not a lot of money, not a lot of bounce back. These things take time. So our deployment model slows down somewhat. Because things operate slower, the logistics are harder, the security situation is much harder to mitigate against. The infrastructure is a challenge instead of being a help. The roads turn to mud, the trucks aren't reliable. There are all kinds of things that slow these responses down in these countries like that. Pakistan, again, another remote distribution due to the security situation. 1,000 shelter kits and 224 shelter boxes are on their way, again, with Plan. We have certain set partners that we've had very successful deployments in the past, and we'd like to reinforce success by working with them in the future. One of our strategic goals is to have global arrangements with people like Plan. We're in the preliminary stages of talking to the Red Cross, who want to have a global Memorandum of Understanding, or an MOU as it's referred to. And that is, we turn up and we have an expected product, we have an expected way of operating, and we have an expected response and an expected way of working with these people that makes things a lot quicker. And it also helps when things don't go well. It streamlines how we're going to put it right and who is responsible for what bit. Cameroon, another security one. Remote to the degree that we've not sent a team to do the assessments. We're working with the UN and an agency called AIDA, but we will be sending a team to oversee it and hopefully see the distributions out with their security arrangements. But when they arrive and have cleared, we reduce the exposure of the volunteers by just getting them there when it's cleared through customs, and also when is the right time to send them to train the people who will actually be putting the tents out and doing the assessments, and hopefully get out and oversee some of that. DPRK, or North Korea as it's more commonly known, we have 400 Flex 3 tents, which is a harder wearing dome tent. The reason we've gone with that is that it does take a stove. Our tents are optimized for hotter climates. The Flex 3, which is more expensive and heavier, which is why we don't use it all the time, is also designed to take a stove. It has a flap that you cut away, and there's a flap that goes over the top of it, and that takes a standard UN tent to get heat inside that tent. And we've chosen that because the North Koreans could be in those tents for some time. And a North Korean winter is quite a thing. Minus 25, minus 30 degrees is not uncommon in their winters. And if you think about that in real terms, that when you go in for your frozen chips and you think, God, that's cold on my hands, that's minus 18. So it's, that cold again. So our tents are not geared up for that. So we've sent these tents with stoves, and we've sent 400 mini green shelter boxes. If you want to know what they look like, please go on the website. We've got photographs, and they're going to North Korea, and they will all meet up, and they'll be distributed by the North Korean government, and we will send a team, as we normally do, to oversee that. And we oversee pretty much 95% of all of the distributions in North Korea on the present model, which is odd, to say the least. It was a Rotarian that got us the contact in North Korea. And we work, oddly enough, not with the Interior Ministry, which works with all of the aid agencies. We work with the Foreign Trade Ministry, because that's where the Rotarians' contact was, and it works well. We seem to get a greater degree of access, a greater degree of say in how we're going to operate the team. And we're working with one particular guy who he's worked in the UK at university, so he has an idea of the outside world, and he has an idea of how we operate. So he's kind of almost our interpreter, not just the language but the culture, and he understands where we're coming from. So it's spookily successful. I was very pessimistic when I went to North Korea, because they've got form and a history of deception and saying that the aid is going to one place when it's not. And Dr. Zhong, our contact there, is at great pains to point out that this, all the families that we think it's going to, it is going to. And the longevity of it is something that Dr. Zhong relies on, because they are very slow, ongoing replacement of shelter, and also they can move the shelter to where they're building their houses or where they're tending their crops. Because of many reasons, they don't grow enough food to actually feed their own population. So growing food and building and growing crops, because they don't have a lot of mechanics or mechanized ways of farming, is all done very old-fashioned ways. So it's very labor-intensive. And if they can have those tents near the shelter, near where they're growing those crops, it increases their ability to feed themselves. And those tents are also used by families near to where they're building their own houses, so it increases their efficiency and reduces the time of bounce back, which is, in a normal deployment, months. In North Korea it can be measured in years. And it was flooding back in the summer. They've all been communally housed, and they can't build in the winter because of the temperature. They use mud bricks and other, sort of homegrown building materials, which just don't work in the winter. So they're coming into their growing season and their building season, and they want those tents to house displaced people, to, one, get them back in their houses quicker, and also to help feed them. So it's the gift that keeps on giving out there. It's odd, but it is still very much in the core of ShelterBox's model. Somalia, moving on to another troubled country, very war-torn, very lawless type of country, very difficult to operate in. So we're going through some extended negotiations on what we expect from a partner there, and also how they can operate and whether that fits that model. I'm not too optimistic about being able to ethically reach people in Somalia, but we will keep trying. And that brings us to the end. So have a think. Let's have a go back to my slide. Sierra Leone, we have schools in a box that have gone down to Sierra Leone with the Navy's supply ships, and they're being distributed, and we will get verification that they have been distributed. Our tents have been looked at by the World Health Organization as not being fit to be used in the hot zones. They've got too many seams, too many bits of material. They're not very easily sterilized after having people who are infected with Ebola in the tents. So being in that core hot zone response is not something that fits our model with the tents that we have. So we've not been included. I think displaced families and how that goes through as a shockwave after the event, we might get involved with displacement and orphanages and that kind of thing. But it's kind of outside of our core model. But we have looked at helping with the Ebola crisis, and it just doesn't fit. So we're not going to force something on people where the donors' money will be wasted. Ukraine, peace talks going on. An alleged ceasefire which seems to have seen more fighting than most wars, and we are in touch with the agencies that are supplying mainly food aid and medicine aid, and as the spring thaws, it might make conditions bearable to live in tents out there. It might mean that we send Flex 3 tents for winter type stuff, but that depends on the displacement and the politics and whether the aid agencies out there can actually reach those people. But I think, having a quick glance across all of those, I think we've covered it all. So please send your questions, send your topics that you want me to cover. This is all about you, and I'm going to get bored all about talking about us. So give us some direction. What do you want to hear? How do you want to hear it? And that's it, really. Goodbye from me.